Hey, look out. It's Faith Talk Live. I'm McProbes.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
Well, it's good to talk to this guy. He has quite a story. James Quentin Stevens was his name. He's got a brand new name, but we're going to find out his story. It is pretty phenomenal. JT, how are you?
Doing great, Rick and Dan. Thank you for having me.
We
I got to
appreciate
be
you being
honest.
on.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. I saw this email and I get so many, we both get so many emails with books and movies and artists and stuff. But you, at one time, a shooter, got my attention. I stopped and then I read the rest of the story. You got a brand new book out. It's called Once a Shooter, Redemption of a High School Gunman. And as I read that, I thought, wow, what a transformation. And we just wanted to hear your story. We want people to hear it. We want them to read your book and just find out more about you. And I don't even know where to begin. Let's begin from the beginning. How did you get to that place in 1982 where you decided in your head to go into a school and do what you did?
Well, Rick, at that point, I was already dead. My life was came to an end when I was going to take my life in suicide on November 10th, 1982. And once you concede to death, it's a very dangerous place to be. And I opened myself up to a lot of direction that I really had no clue where it was coming from. But again, we have to be accountable for our actions, though we might talk to God and talk to ourselves. But when we talk to Satan, people think you're crazy, but you can talk to Satan. I don't advise it. But at that point, I was already dead. And between the point of actually taking my own life and actually getting ready to do it, that's when this presence presented itself to me and said, no, don't do it this way. If you do it my way, I'll give you the real peace you're looking for. And for the next 8 hours, just at that point was already dead, and just having this conversation with this darkness within myself. And by the time I got to the school the next morning, I was already dead, kind of like a zombie in The Walking Dead. The same kind of mentality, heart beating, brains working, but there is no soul. And so walking into the school, no hesitation, just started shooting, with the end result of knowing that I wanted death. And so just a coward of making a choice to do something like this. But the book will tell you amazing miracles along this journey. It was things I did not deserve, things that happened to me that were not, in the world's view, would have been just, do away with this guy. He's better off dead. But by the grace of God, not one bullet that was fired touched any souls in that school that day. And I had busted out a bunch of windows inside, because the rage during the first 15, 30 minutes of these situations are the worst. And I took a big chunk of meat out of my right hand as I busted out all these windows. And so blood was going everywhere. It was my blood. And I went into that office and started shooting. There was a lot of faculties and people in there. And what I mean by shooting, I shot above their heads. I didn't shoot down at them. I shot above their heads. And a lot of screaming, a lot of, I don't know who that person was. And I'm grateful that I'm not that person today, because the title of the book, Once a Shooter, is exactly what it says. Once a shooter, no more. I'm a new creation in Christ. And so for the next 7 hours, a lot of negotiations with the SWAT team, and a lot of things happened. And you can read more about that in the book. But there come a pivoting moment at midnight the first day, over the 21-hour siege. It was a 2-day ordeal. And I had 9 hostages in the room and one in an office that I never knew about that was trapped. And that voice of that conversation I had the night before became many voices, many conversations within my cell. And it said, we had a deal. You need to take these people down. And with a little bit more verbiage, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And I finally got to the point where I was having this internal argument with this darkness. And I finally got to the point, no. So I said, if I kill myself, you can't take these people through me. So I got on my knees, put the barrel in my mouth. And again, accountability. We can't blame the devil for what we're doing, right? We have to make that choice. We have free will. That's why God gives us free will. But I'm just telling you the experience that I had. And I got down on my knees, put the gun in my mouth in front of the hostages. And one of the ladies fell to her knees, screamed and shouted, please don't do this. Please, you're just a kid. You haven't hurt anybody.
Wow.
You don't know what you're doing. And at that moment, something pierced my right eye with the barrel in my mouth. And I jerked over and looked. And as she was swaying back and forth on her knees, there was a gold cross reflecting from a light off the ceiling and pierced my right eye. And as soon as my eyes met this cross, as soon as it confronted myself and it confronted what was within me, it changed everything. And I basically just in rage screamed at her and said, get out, get away. I just wanted that cross away from me. And so she ran out of the room, and within seconds, a miraculous point that took place, and it's all in the book of what happened then. But I can tell you, the 100-foot waves of this storm within me became a golden pond. I could now see with eyes and hear with ears and feel the feelings of those in the room with me. I could sense their pain. I could sense their families concerned about them. I became human again in just an instant. And for the next 7 hours of the ordeal, I was letting people go one hour at a time. I let 2 people go for ice cream and pizza, and 1 go for coffee, and just any excuse I could find to let them out. And I was getting down to the last hostage about early in the morning, next morning. And she looked at me, she said, I know what you're doing. And I said, what am I doing? She said, you're going to do suicide by cop. I know what you're doing. And I looked at her and I said, I deserve this. I deserve death for what I've done to you. You don't. Please, you have to leave. And she knew the firing squad was waiting for me outside. She looked at me, she said, no, I'm not leaving without you. You're coming with me if I go out. By that time, I'd lost so much blood. I was so weak. And even though I found that peace that passes all understanding, and I didn't understand it. All I knew is I had peace now. And I was ready to die. You know what I mean? Like, I found what I was looking for my entire life by that cross. And so I said to her, okay, let's go. And by that time, I lost so much blood. I was weak, and she could have took me over if she wanted to. And she grabbed a hold of me and she squeezed me and walked out. We walked out in front of the firing squad. And right then, another miracle took place. And it's so detailed. You really need to look in the book and see this and see what God did in that very moment. But during this journey, the first thing, they took me to the hospital and sewed up my arm and put me in front of interrogation through the SWAT team and said, who was working with you? And I looked at them like, what are you talking about? And they said, somebody had to be working with. We had a sniper shot on you to kill on sight, which they call a green light. And on a red light, it's hold your fire until commanded, even though if you have a clean shot. And every time you showed your face, we had a red light on. But whenever we had the green light on, you were nowhere to be found. There's no way you would have known this. And I dropped my head to the table, this metal table, and I didn't know who I was talking to. I knew it was a higher power. And I said, well, why did you let me live? Why didn't you just let them kill me? And so I was facing 144 years in prison. And so many things in the book. It describes the miracles that took place even in prison. And, God has brought me from so much darkness into so much light. And I'm now sharing my story because it's so important that for 36 years, I ran from it because I was so concerned about my reputation and, my situation with my lifestyle and my family and so forth. But I realized the Lord revealed to me, this isn't about you, TJ. And I continuously had this dream for so many years before I told my story for the first time. And it was me standing before God. And it's repetitive. I saw this dream over and over again. And I'm standing before God at my judgment seat. And he says to me, he says, "Get behind me. I never knew you. I gave you all these miracles and you've told no one. I never knew you. Get away from me." And it just I'd wake up in a cold sweat. And I knew God was calling me to do something greater. And as I watched these children being basically massacred in these schools, my heart would break every time. But Parkland was the one that finally pushed it overboard. And I finally said, no more. I've got to tell them what changed this high school shooter. And that is the love of Jesus Christ. That is what empowered me to become more of his image opposed to what I thought that I should be. And so the storyline in there, it's basically a life's journey all the way up to now, how I'm now helping kids with cancer and their bills, raising money. I do concerts, Christian concerts, and I raise money for organizations across the nation. I've done things for the military. I've done things for the homeless. And when I say I'll say there's a lot of volunteers that work with me that really help, but I'm kind of the organizer, the promoter of it. And I see a lot more healing as I help others. It heals me, to give back what God has called me to do. And at the end of every concert, when I work with people like Big Daddy Weave and Mike Weaver, and I asked him one time, I said, "Will you give invitation at the end of the concert?" He said, "Absolutely." He's an awesome guy. And he gave invitation, and the children just came up in the hundreds, just came up to give their hearts to Christ. And I've asked myself all my life, why'd you let me live, Lord? And when I saw this, the Lord spoke to me and said, "This is why I let you live."
Wow.
Love that. What a story. James Quentin Stevens, TJ Stevens there telling his story. You can get his book. It's called Once a Shooter, Redemption of a High School Gunman. It'll fill in all the gaps there. And we're so glad that you're doing now what you've been called to do, and so many lives change. Give us your website, if you will, so that folks can follow you, probably on Facebook, I'm assuming. You can get the book on Amazon, I'm assuming, as well. Where can they get the book?
Sure. You can go to onceashooter.com. It's through Reginary Publishing. And then, of course, Amazon and your local brick and mortar, too. We've got Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. They also sell it. But my goal is, hey, if you know of a kid that's hurting, if you know he's in a dark place, get that book for him. Place it in his hand. Let him read what God can do with a kid in a dark place. Because that's the whole reason I wrote the book. To find that next shooter and stop this massacre, stop this madness, and save the shooter as well as the victims.
That's so good. TJ, thanks for writing that, and thanks for hanging with us. We'd love to speak to you soon, and God's blessings to you and your family and your ministry that God has just so richly given you. Hey, we got to take a break. We'll be right back. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
This is Faith Talk Live.